The faded, past due notices lay scattered across a worn Formica kitchen table bathed in the harsh, flickering light of a single overhead bulb, a silent testament to a desperate reality of poverty and sleepless nights. That lingering image of struggle shatters instantly into the deafening roar of 70,000 people screaming in a massive Texas stadium, blinding spotlights bouncing off the crisp brim of an iconic cowboy hat. Then comes the brutal, sudden cut to absolute silence. The heavy, deliberate thud of a worn leather boot stepping onto a creaking wooden floorboard echoes through the stillness. The air is thick and heavy, illuminated only by sharp shafts of late afternoon sun that cut through the dancing dust of a modest, aging bedroom in Pearsall, South Texas. George Strait, the undisputed king of country music, a man known to the world for his unshakable posture and stone-cold stoicism, stands frozen in the center of the room. He is not wearing his signature starched shirts or his custom hats today, but a simple, faded button-down and worn denim jeans. His hands, usually so steady on the neck of a guitar, are trembling slightly. The camera of life focuses on his face, a landscape sculpted by decades of endless highways, blinding stage lights, and quiet resilience, and the universe witnesses the impossible. A solitary tear escapes, tracing a slow, agonizing path down the face of the Iron Cowboy before his knees give way and he collapses onto the hard wooden floor. The scorching Texas sun beats down mercilessly on the asphalt outside, baking the earth until it cracks. But inside the old farmhouse, the air remains surprisingly cool, carrying the deeply ingrained scents of aged pine, beeswax, and dried lavender. George is entirely alone. The estate executor had handed over the heavy brass keys hours ago, offering a polite nod of condolence before driving off down the dusty county road, leaving the son to face the echoes of his childhood. There is no entourage here, no screaming fans, no steel guitar whining in the background to fill the void. He is stripped down to his most raw and vulnerable state, just an orphaned son standing in the sanctuary of his deceased mother. The room has remained untouched since she passed, a humble museum frozen in time. In the corner sits a heavy cast-iron Singer sewing machine, its pedal worn smooth from decades of relentless rhythm. Above it hangs a collection of framed photographs, the glass slightly clouded with age, showing a young, wide-eyed George standing proudly beside his very first horse. The task ahead of him is not a grand, monumental event, but the agonizingly simple act of opening the first flat cardboard box and beginning to dismantle a life. George approaches the old wooden dresser, his jaw clenched tight. He swallows hard, fighting the lump forming in his throat, relying on the classic response of a countryman who was raised to swallow his grief, put his head down, and get the hard work done. He opens the top drawer and begins to mechanically fold the modest floral print blouses and the handmade patchwork quilts. The conflict raging inside him is entirely internal, a violent storm hidden beneath a calm surface. He fights against the rising tide of memories that every single piece of fabric evokes. The dust settling on the top shelves seems to carry the immense, crushing weight of all the years he spent out on the road, traveling from city to city, playing sold-out arenas, and living a life of unimaginable scale, while his mother aged quietly in the profound stillness of this empty house. A heavy blanket of survivor guilt begins to drape over his broad shoulders. He remembers the countless times he called her from a noisy payphone in a crowded backstage hallway, promising he would come visit as soon as the tour wrapped up, only to have another leg of the tour added the very next day. She never complained. She only ever told him how proud she was, her voice sweet and steady through the crackling telephone wire, assuring him that she was perfectly fine, that the garden was blooming, and that she had watched his latest performance on the television. Now, holding a faded cotton apron that still faintly smells of vanilla and flour, the reality of her permanent absence hits him with the force of a physical blow. He folds the apron with immense reverence, as if handling a sacred relic, and places it gently into the bottom of the cardboard box. As the long Texas afternoon drags on, the sun begins its slow descent, casting long, mournful shadows across the faded floral wallpaper. The antagonist in this quiet room is not a person, but the relentless, unforgiving nature of time and the bitter sting of regret. Every drawer George empties, every closet door he opens, is another strike against his emotional armor. He moves to the bedside table, a simple piece of oak furniture holding a worn, leather-bound Bible and a pair of reading glasses. Tucked inside the pages of the Bible, he finds small, meticulously cut newspaper clippings. They are not the glossy magazine covers or the front page articles announcing his record-breaking stadium tours. Instead, they are tiny, yellowed paragraphs from local county papers dating back decades, advertising his very first shows in dim, smoke-filled roadside bars in San Marcos. There are faded ticket stubs from county fairs, and a dusty cassette tape of his earliest, roughest vocal recordings played on a local AM radio station. She had kept everything, guarding the humble beginnings of his legacy with the fierce devotion of a mother who knew his worth long before the rest of the world caught on. The physical exhaustion of hauling heavy boxes out to the hallway begins to mirror his profound mental depletion. His boots scuff against the floorboards, a slow, dragging rhythm that replaces the upbeat tempo of his life on stage. He reaches the lowest point of his emotional journey when he finally stops, his chest heaving slightly, and sits down heavily on the edge of the mattress, now stripped bare of its linens. The room is almost entirely empty now, the bare walls and cleared surfaces echoing the vast, hollow sensation expanding inside his own chest. He rests his elbows on his knees and looks down at his hands. They are large, capable hands, the fingertips heavily calloused from pressing down on steel strings for more than 40 years. They are hands that have held platinum records, shaken hands with presidents, and gripped the steering wheels of luxury trucks. But right now, staring at those hands in the dimming light of the farmhouse, he feels the bitter, undeniable reality that all the wealth, all the fame, and all the accolades in the world cannot buy him 5 more minutes to sit on the porch with her and drink a glass of sweet tea. He closes his eyes, bowing his head in the silent, suffocating room, and offers a quiet prayer, asking for the strength to finish this final duty. He knows he cannot leave the job half done. He takes a deep, ragged breath, the scent of the old pine filling his lungs, and pushes himself up from the bare mattress. There is only one piece of furniture left to clear. Sitting at the foot of the bed is a massive antique cedar chest. It is a heavy, imposing piece of craftsmanship, bound with dark, rusted iron straps and fitted with thick metal handles on either side. It has sat in that exact spot for as long as George can remember, usually holding extra winter blankets and mothballs. He walks over to the chest, his boots echoing in the empty space. He bends down, gripping the cold iron handles with his calloused fingers. Bracing his legs, he pulls upward and backward, intending to drag the heavy trunk away from the bed frame to clean behind it. As the solid wood scrapes harshly against the floorboards, a sudden, sharp, dry crack echoes through the quiet room. George freezes, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looks down at the chest. The movement had caused one of the thick wooden planks on the very bottom of the trunk to shift slightly out of place. He kneels down, running his hand along the bottom edge of the chest. The wood feels uneven. He taps his knuckles against the side of the trunk, hearing a solid, dense thud. Then, he taps his knuckles against the bottom plank that had shifted. The sound that returns to him is distinctively different. It is hollow. A deep, inexplicable sense of anticipation washes over him, momentarily cutting through his heavy grief. The interior of the chest, he suddenly realizes, is significantly shallower than the exterior dimensions suggest. He shifts his weight, dropping down onto both knees on the hard wooden floor, his eyes locked on the narrow, dark crevice that has appeared at the base of the ancient cedar trunk. He reaches out, his breathing slowing down, and carefully wedges his strong fingers into the tight gap of the wood, preparing to pull back the false bottom that has remained hidden in the shadows of this quiet Texas farmhouse for decades. If you want to discover the secret guarded so fiercely by the mother of the greatest country legend, subscribe to the channel now and witness the truth that changed everything. With a firm, deliberate grip, George wedges his calloused fingers deeper into the narrow crevice of the ancient cedar wood. Outside the dusty window panes, the heavy Texas sky begins to bruise with the dark, purple hues of an approaching summer thunderstorm. The air pressure drops, bringing with it the faint, metallic scent of distant rain hitting dry earth, a smell that has always meant home to him. But inside the suffocating stillness of the bedroom, a different kind of storm is about to break. He pulls backward with a sudden surge of strength. The stubborn iron nails, buried in the wood for over half a century, emit a high, agonizing screech that shatters the silence of the farmhouse. The thick cedar plank groans, splinters, and finally gives way. A cloud of fine, gray dust rises into the stifling air, catching the fading shafts of sunlight like suspended ash. George waves a heavy hand in front of his face, his eyes watering slightly from the debris. He leans forward, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow over the trunk. He peers into the newly revealed space. It is a shallow, hidden compartment, barely 4 inches deep, running the entire length of the chest. He had expected to find perhaps a forgotten stack of property deeds, old insurance policies, or maybe the original blueprints of the farmhouse his father had built. Instead, resting alone in the very center of the rough-hewn wood, is a single rectangular package. It is wrapped meticulously in a piece of dark, worn velvet and bound tightly with a brittle, yellowed cotton string. George stares at the bundle. His breath hitches in his chest. The stoic, unshakable aura of the country legend seems to evaporate into the dusty air, leaving behind only a terrified son. His hands, which have confidently guided thousands of wild horses and strummed the opening chords to anthems sung by millions, are visibly shaking as he reaches down into the dark cavity. The velvet feels surprisingly soft against his rough skin, a stark contrast to the unforgiving reality of the empty room. He lifts the package. It is heavier than it looks. He slowly sits back on his heels, resting the bundle on his denim-clad thighs. The silence in the house is absolute, save for the low, ominous rumble of thunder rolling across the distant plains. He pulls at the knot of the cotton string. It is tied with the same careful, precise loops his mother used to secure the flour sacks in the pantry. The string snaps under the pressure of his fingers, the dry fibers turning to dust. Carefully, almost reverently, he peels back the folds of the dark velvet. The fabric falls away, revealing a stack of distinct, carefully organized items. The very top layer consists of a thick bundle of small, rectangular slips of paper. They are stiff, discolored with age, and smell faintly of cheap tobacco and stale ink. George picks up the first slip, bringing it closer to his face in the dimming light. The bold, stamped letters at the top of the paper read, San Antonio Pawn and Loan. His brow furrows in deep confusion. He looks at the date scrawled in faded blue ink. October 14, 1978. It was a year, burned into his memory, the hardest year of his life. It was the year he was playing empty honky-tonks along the dusty highways, sleeping in the bed of his rusted pickup truck, and seriously considering hanging up his guitar for good to take a job at the local feed mill. He forces his eyes to read the handwritten description of the item pawned. Solid gold wedding band with single diamond inlay. A cold, paralyzing chill washes over him, starting at the base of his neck and spreading rapidly down his spine. He remembers that ring. It was the only piece of jewelry his mother wore every single day of his childhood, a symbol of a hard-fought, enduring love. She had told him years ago that she had lost it while working in the garden, pulling weeds near the old oak tree. He remembers spending 3 entire days on his hands and knees in the dirt, desperately searching for it while she watched from the porch, telling him gently to let it go. His trembling fingers pull the next receipt from the stack. November 12, 1978. Antique silver pocket watch, engraved. It was his grandfather's watch, the one brought back from the war, the one she had promised to pass down to George when he had a son of his own. The next receipt reads, grandmother's pearl necklace. The next reads, sterling silver dining set. One by one, the faded slips of paper tell a devastating, undeniable story of systematic, desperate liquidation. She had stripped the house of every single valuable heirloom, every piece of family history, every item of personal sentiment. George feels the air being violently sucked from his lungs. He drops the pawn receipts onto the velvet, his hands moving frantically to the next item in the pile. It is a stack of old blue bank passbooks, held together by a rusted paperclip. He opens the first one. The pages are filled with meticulous, handwritten entries detailing anonymous cash deposits made into a specific checking account. George recognizes the account number instantly. It was his old account, the account he used when he was broke, starving, and desperate in San Marcos. The memories hit him with the brutal force of a runaway freight train. He remembers the darkest night of his early career, sitting on the edge of a stained motel mattress, staring at an eviction notice and a disconnection warning. He had called her, his voice cracking with defeat, telling her he was coming home, that the dream was dead, that he was a failure. She had listened quietly, told him she loved him, and asked him to wait just 1 more week. 2 days later, a miraculous, anonymous deposit had appeared in his account, enough to pay the rent, fix his truck, and buy groceries for a month. He had convinced himself it was a clerical error or a secret advance from a talent scout who had seen him play. He flips the pages of the passbook, matching the dates of the deposits to the dates on the pawnshop receipts. They align perfectly. The gold ring paid for his rent. The silver watch bought his groceries. The pearl necklace put the gas in his truck to drive to Nashville. The entire foundation of his self-made, rugged cowboy image. The story he had told in 100 interviews about pulling himself up by his bootstraps and surviving on grit and determination crumbles into dust before his eyes. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a man built on the silent, agonizing sacrifices of a mother who sold her past to finance his future. A low, guttural sound escapes George's throat, a sound of profound, unbearable anguish. But the velvet package is not empty yet. Beneath the passbooks lies a thick brown manila envelope. It is sealed, but the adhesive has dried out over the years, allowing the flap to lift easily. George reaches inside and pulls out a single, pristine piece of paper. It is a cashier's check. The paper is crisp, completely untouched by time, standing in stark contrast to the yellowed receipts and the worn passbooks. He stares at the numbers printed on the check, his vision beginning to blur with unshed tears. $1 million. He looks at the date. It was issued 5 years after he hit his first #1 single, the year his first stadium tour sold out in record time. He remembers the exact moment he handed this envelope to her. He had driven up to this very farmhouse in a brand new, custom-painted luxury truck. He had walked into the kitchen wearing a custom-tailored suit and a silver belt buckle the size of a dinner plate. He had tossed the envelope onto the Formica table, puffing his chest out with the arrogant pride of a young man who had finally conquered the world. He remembers his exact words to her. Buy the world, Mama. Buy a mansion in Dallas. Buy a ranch in Montana. Hire a maid, hire a cook, never wash another dish as long as you live. You're rich now. He remembers how she had looked at him. She hadn't opened the envelope. She had simply smiled, that warm, gentle smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She had wiped her flour-coated hands on her apron, walked over and kissed him softly on the cheek. She had told him that she already had everything she could ever possibly want, right here in this little house, watching him soar. She had told him to put the money away for a rainy day. He had insisted she keep it, demanding she cash it and live like a queen. She had nodded, slipping the envelope into her pocket to appease his pride. Now, decades later, George holds the uncashed check in his trembling hands. She had never taken a single dime. She had lived out the rest of her days in this modest farmhouse, sewing her own clothes on the heavy iron machine in the corner, tending to her small vegetable garden and driving a 10-year-old sedan. She had held $1 million in her hands, a fortune given by a son who thought money could repay a debt of love, and she had hidden it away in the dark. The realization strikes him with a crushing, suffocating weight. The studio that gave him his first big break, the legendary recording session that launched his career, they hadn't given him a discount because they believed in his raw talent. He remembers the studio owner pulling him aside, telling him that a silent investor had covered the exorbitant hourly fees, allowing him to record his demo tape. George had strutted out of that studio believing he was destined for greatness, believing his voice alone had opened the doors. He looks down at the pawn receipt for the sterling silver dining set. The date matches the week of his recording session. His mother had not just supported his dream, she had bought it, she had bled for it. She had systematically dismantled her own life, trading away the precious heirlooms of their ancestors, enduring double shifts at the local diner, and suffering in absolute silence so that her son would never have to compromise his pride. She had built a fortress of dignity around him, allowing him to walk onto those stages feeling like a king, entirely unaware that his crown was forged from the melted gold of her wedding ring. George drops the $1 million check onto the wooden floor. It flutters down, landing next to the faded pawn receipts, a useless piece of paper mocking his wealth. The storm outside finally breaks. A massive crack of thunder shakes the farmhouse to its very foundations, and the sky opens up, unleashing a torrential downpour of heavy Texas rain. The raindrops hammer violently against the tin roof, a deafening drumbeat that fills the empty room. George Strait, the Iron Cowboy, the unshakable legend of country music, falls forward. He plants his hands on the dusty floorboards, his broad shoulders heaving violently. He gasps for air, the scent of the old pine and the fresh rain mixing in his lungs. The dam inside him, the stoic wall he had maintained for a lifetime, shatters completely. He cries out, a raw, agonizing sound that is swallowed by the roar of the rain on the roof. He is no longer an icon. He is just a broken man, kneeling in the dust of his own ignorance, crushed by the monumental weight of a mother's absolute, unconditional sacrifice. The torrential Texas rain hammers against the rusted tin roof of the farmhouse, a deafening, relentless rhythm that drowns out the heavy, ragged sobs echoing within the dusty bedroom. George remains on his knees, his hands pressed flat against the rough wooden floorboards, his knuckles white with tension. The uncashed $1 million check, the faded pawn receipts, and the blue bank passbooks lie scattered around him like the debris of a shattered illusion. The towering monument of his self-made legacy has crumbled, leaving him exposed to the blinding, painful truth of his own salvation. He gasps for breath, the cool, damp air of the storm doing little to soothe the burning in his chest. Slowly, with movements that feel heavy and aged, he reaches back into the shallow, hidden compartment of the cedar chest. His trembling fingers brush against the final item resting at the very bottom of the velvet bundle. It is a small, worn journal bound in cracked, dark brown leather. The cover is smooth from years of handling, the corners frayed and soft. George pulls it from the shadows, the leather feeling warm and familiar against his palm. He sits back heavily on his heels, the storm raging outside mirroring the tempest within him. He opens the journal. The pages are filled with his mother's elegant, precise handwriting, the ink fading from dark blue to a soft, grayish hue over the decades. He turns the brittle pages, his eyes scanning the entries. They are not grand philosophical musings or complaints about her hardships. Instead, they are meticulous, loving chronicles of his life. She had recorded the exact dates of his first guitar lessons, the names of the dive bars where he played his earliest gigs, and the set lists of songs he had sung to empty rooms. She had written about the nights she stayed awake, pacing the worn linoleum of the kitchen floor, praying for his safety on the treacherous, icy highways as he drove from town to town in his beat-up truck. She had documented every small victory, every minor setback, and every moment of doubt he had ever confessed to her. George flips toward the end of the journal. The final entry is dated on a day that is permanently etched into his soul, the day he made his historic debut on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. It was the night the world finally recognized him, the night the crown was placed upon his head. He remembers standing in the wings, his heart pounding against his ribs, wishing more than anything that she had been well enough to travel and see him step into the sacred circle of wood. He reads the final page, his vision blurring with fresh tears. The entry is not a diary reflection. It is a letter, addressed directly to him. My dearest George, the letter begins, the handwriting steady and proud. If you are reading this, it means I have gone on ahead, and you are finally cleaning out this old house. I know you, my son. I know you're sitting there, blaming yourself for being away, carrying the weight of the world on those broad shoulders of yours. I write this to tell you to put that burden down. You never owed me a single moment of your time, nor a single dime of your wealth. The greatest gift of my entire life, the only reward I ever needed, was the profound privilege of watching you shine. George's breath catches in his throat. He wipes roughly at his eyes, the rough denim of his sleeve scratching his face, and forces himself to continue reading. I know you found the receipts. I know you found the check. Do not be angry and do not feel guilt. A cowboy cannot ride straight and true if he is carrying the weight of the world on his back. I hid my struggles from you because your pride was the fire that fueled your talent. If you had known what it cost to buy that guitar, to pay for that studio time, you would have quit. You would have come home and worked at the feed mill, and the world would have been robbed of your voice. I traded gold and silver for something far more precious. I traded it for the chance to hear millions of people sing the words my son wrote. Keep the check, George. I never needed to buy the world. You already gave it to me. The words strike him with the force of a physical blow, shattering the last remaining fragments of his stoic facade. George Strait, the iron pillar of country music, collapses forward, burying his face in his hands. He weeps violently, his broad shoulders shaking with the raw, unrestrained grief of a boy who has finally understood the magnitude of his mother's love. The tears are not born of pity, nor of simple sadness. They are a profound, soul-cleansing catharsis. He cries for the antique silver watch he will never pass down to his own son. He cries for the gold wedding band lost to a pawnshop glass case. But most of all, he cries with a devastating, overwhelming gratitude for the woman who deliberately chose to live in the shadows, stripping herself of everything she owned so that he could stand in the blinding light of the stage. The storm outside begins to break. The heavy rain slows to a steady drizzle, and the thunder rolls away into the distance, leaving behind a profound, washed-clean silence. George slowly lifts his head. His eyes are red and swollen, his face streaked with tears and dust, but the heavy, suffocating weight that had pressed down on his chest since he arrived at the farmhouse has lifted. He looks around the empty bedroom. It is no longer a monument to his absence, nor a tomb of regret. It feels purified, sanctified by the revelation of her sacrifice. He does not pack the items from the false bottom into the cardboard donation boxes waiting in the hallway. Instead, he gathers the faded pawn receipts, the blue bank passbooks, the uncashed $1 million check, and the leather-bound journal. He wraps them carefully, reverently, back into the dark velvet cloth, tying the bundle with a new piece of sturdy leather cord from his own pocket. He places the package gently into his personal, battered leather touring case, the same case that travels with him on every flight, to every stadium, on every tour bus. He stands up, his knees popping slightly, and walks out of the bedroom. He locks the heavy wooden front door of the farmhouse, stepping out onto the porch. The air smells of wet earth and sweet sage. He breathes it in deeply, a changed man, carrying a new understanding of exactly who he is and how he came to be. The narrative shifts, the heavy Texas summer dissolving into the crisp electric atmosphere of a cool spring night. 6 months have passed. The scene opens on the colossal, sprawling expanse of the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. The massive stadium is packed to absolute capacity, a sea of over 70,000 people buzzing with anticipation. The air is thick with the smell of fried food, stale beer, and the unmistakable energy of a monumental event. Suddenly, the towering arena lights cut out, plunging the stadium into total darkness. The deafening roar of the crowd shakes the concrete foundations. Usually, this is the moment the giant video screens flare to life, accompanied by the explosive, driving sound of George's full 10-piece band launching into his biggest, most energetic hit. But tonight, the stage remains dark. The crowd's roar slowly tapers off into a confused, expectant murmur. A single, stark white spotlight pierces the darkness, illuminating the very center of the massive stage. George Strait walks into the circle of light. The crowd erupts again, but the cheering quickly shifts to a stunned, reverent silence as they realize he is entirely alone. There is no band behind him. He's not wearing his signature starched shirt or his custom-made blazer. He is dressed simply in worn jeans and a plain black button-down. Most strikingly, he is not holding his famous, gleaming custom acoustic guitar. Strapped across his broad shoulders is an old, deeply scratched and battered acoustic guitar. The wood is chipped, the varnish is worn away around the sound hole, and the pickguard is deeply scarred. It is the very first professional guitar he ever owned, the exact instrument paid for by the pawned gold wedding band and the antique silver pocket watch. George walks to the microphone stand. He doesn't strike a triumphant pose. He simply stands there, the bright spotlight reflecting off the brim of his hat, and looks out over the massive sea of faces. The silence in the stadium is absolute, heavy with anticipation. He reaches up and adjusts the microphone, his movements slow and deliberate. He leans into the mic, his voice echoing through the massive arena. It is not the smooth, polished voice of the entertainer they know. It is rough, slightly unsteady, and thick with raw emotion. "I've stood on stages like this for a long time," George begins, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. The sound echoes through the cavernous space, instantly commanding the total attention of 70,000 people. "I've told a lot of stories about hard work, about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, about making it on your own." He pauses, looking down at the scarred wood of the old guitar resting against his chest. He runs a calloused thumb over a deep scratch near the bridge. "But the truth is," he continues, looking back up into the blinding light, "nobody ever makes it on their own. Every time I walked out here feeling like a king, I didn't know I was wearing a crown paid for by someone else's blood and sweat. I recently went back to my childhood home to clean out my mother's room." A collective, sympathetic hush falls over the massive crowd. "I found an old cedar chest at the foot of her bed," George says, his voice dropping to a low, intimate timbre, making the massive stadium feel as small and quiet as that dusty bedroom in Pearsall. "And hidden in a false bottom, I found the truth. I found the pawn shop receipts for her wedding ring. I found the receipts for my grandfather's watch. I found an uncashed check I gave her years ago, thinking I could buy her the world, while she was secretly living in the shadows, quietly paying for mine." The silence in the arena is profound. Not a single person moves. The camera pans across the crowd, showing hardened cowboys, young fans, and older couples all staring at the stage, tears welling in their eyes. "I always thought my voice got me here," George says, his voice breaking completely. He reaches up and wipes a tear from his cheek, making no effort to hide it from the giant screens broadcasting his face to the crowd. "But it wasn't my voice. It was her silence. This guitar I'm holding, it cost her everything she had, and she never asked for a single note of credit." George takes a deep, shuddering breath, composing himself. He grips the neck of the old battered guitar. "I wrote a new song," he says softly. "I've never played it before, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to play it again. It's not about whiskey, and it's not about rodeo. It's about a cedar chest, a gold ring, and the greatest woman I will ever know." He steps back from the microphone. His calloused fingers, the same fingers that had frantically torn away the dark velvet in the dusty farmhouse, now gently pressed down on the steel strings. He strikes the first chord. It is raw, acoustic, and hauntingly beautiful, echoing through the silent stadium. He begins to sing, his voice carrying the immense, crushing weight of his profound gratitude, his profound sorrow, and his ultimate redemption. The song tells the story of the pawn shop in San Antonio, the uncashed check, and the quiet dignity of a woman who built a legend with her bare hands. As the final, lingering chord of the battered guitar fades into the cool night air, the stadium remains completely silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then, slowly, starting from the front rows and rolling backward like a massive wave, 70,000 people rise to their feet. The applause is not the wild, screaming frenzy of a typical concert. It is a deep, thunderous, respectful ovation. It is the sound of a massive crowd honoring not the king of country standing on the stage, but the invisible queen who put him there. George Strait stands in the center of the spotlight, tears streaming freely down his face, holding the old guitar tight against his chest, finally understanding that the true measure of a man's legacy is not found in the roar of the crowd, but in the quiet, hidden sacrifices of those who loved him enough to let him fly.